I'm ready.
We good to go, James?
You're good.
All right, cool. All right, well, happy Wednesday, everybody. Thank you for coming to the team meeting. Thank you for being in the room. Thank you for bringing energy. Thank you for showing up and playing hard in life and family and in real estate. So we're going to hop in and go through some announcement stuff before I bring up my friend Ashley to talk about human trafficking. So James, if you want to kind of hop into the slides, that'd be awesome. So first and foremost, I want to recognize a couple of people that tapped in the last week. So if you're new to us, you don't know what that is, basically, these folks are keeping 100% of their commission for the balance of their year. So number one, congratulations to Brandis. So you got to give Brandis a round of applause. Online, and then also to Michelle and Patrick, congratulations on tapping. You put two people on our commercial division. So Devian just closed a really big, two big apartment buildings. So he capped right away on those. So congratulations to Devian. Son for hitting it one more time. So congrats to all y'all. So congrats. Next. I put these numbers up last week, and I just want to kind of dive back into these just to give some perspective of the amount of business that you all are doing here at Keller Williams Roseville. So the screen is blocked over there to the side for where we are year to date. But just looking at the volume of business that you guys have accomplished, specifically during the month of April, I'm going to write some of this stuff up on the board. So just to kind of put this in perspective, during the month of April, you guys sold in totality $156 million worth of houses. In the over 20-year history of Keller Williams Roseville, that is the #1 month ever performed in the history of this office. So, all right. That is pretty incredible. In a market where we're talking about there's no inventory, that no one's selling their homes, during the month of April, you guys listed 148 houses. That's the most homes listed since August of 2018 out of this office. So in a market where they're saying no one's selling, that's the highest numbers taken in the last 3 years. Pretty darn impressive. You can clap for that one too, Paul. Contracts written, similar deal. So not only we're saying there's not a whole lot of houses out there, but it's hard to get your offers accepted. You put 263 homes into contract last month, which is the highest since May 2018. So the highest in 3 years. Okay. Anyone want to guess how much commission was paid during the month of April? I dare somebody to guess.
56 million times 2.
That's a hard calculation. You don't want to guess? Not Chris Ashley. You can't guess. Anybody else in the room can guess though.
I'm going to say
25 million.
200,000.
$3.7 million of commission earned in 1 month. That's incredible work. So congratulations to everybody. Piece of that. If you didn't get any of these things during the month of April, look around in the room to some of the people that did. I'm not going to call anybody out, but David shared a story this morning. Where did David go? Right here. Okay. So David, can I call you up for a second?
Sure.
Come on up for a second. So David, come on. This is David Holling. So David shared a story with me this morning. He's a new agent to us, and he gave me a story this morning about our culture. So would you mind just kind of sharing with the group? Sorry to make it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
Can I kind of share what you said this morning about how people have walked into your life already?
So yeah, I came here for like the technology and the training, but then the culture became #1 and the people. Paul has been kicking butt with the 6 personal perspectives. Him and Robin have just been amazing. Robin and Mike have been challenging me daily with things. Hannah has been so supportive with all the tech and anything else, just really great. And then yesterday, Steve Smith took an hour out of his day to just powwow with me and go over some scripts and let me tap into his wealth of knowledge. And it's just amazing. Every day someone else is willing to share something and help out. And it's just super amazing.
Awesome. Thank you, buddy. All right.
He shows up to play.
Right.
Yeah, he shows up to play, puts on the helmet, the pads, and he gets it done. So I mean, just applying the 4-in-1 and showing up the different trainings, just phenomenal.
Awesome, cool, thank you both. All right, cool, next slide, James. So a couple of things on Red Day. So look, I wrote this thing up on the board just for fun. So if you all don't know what Red Day is, that's our big day. We did it a little bit different this year and did kind of a little three-pronged approach. But our first step with this was to renew back into our community. So through your guys' donations, we raised $8,000 to go to the ARC of Placer County. The E is for energize, which I'm going to come back to in a second, and the D is for donate. So tomorrow is our day to donate blood. So we still have a few spots left to do. If you haven't signed up yet, you can grab the QR code on your way out. If you're online, you can grab it out of the chat, but you got to sign up in advance. It takes about 90 seconds just to put in your information. The blood van's going to be here in the morning. We have a couple spots left. Any of our affiliates that are online are in the room too. If you guys want to grab one of those spots, feel free to do so. I was telling James this morning, so typically we're renew, we're energize, and we're donate. But I had this epiphany this morning in the shower, not that you asked, that I'm going to change that energize. And for this year, it's going to be educate, which is why I'm going to have Ashley come up and talk about human trafficking. So don't tell Mo Anderson that I changed what these things are, but for this year only, we're going to make that e-education. So, okay, next one, James. So there's your QR code. And then Logan, here's my buddy, Logan. Logan's going to come and give us our mortgage moment. You can clap for Logan. Too. Make him feel welcome.
Logan Knosco with Moving Mortgage, definitely known as the VA guy around the office. Listen, I've actually come in contact with a lot of agents because of the months we're having right now who have not dealt positively with VA loans and have a lot of questions about them. So today I just kind of want to go over appraisals. Has anybody gotten Tidewater before or even know what that is?
What is that?
Perfect. So Tidewater is on. One of the cool things about a VA appraisal is if it's going to come in low, they have to give you what's called Tidewater, which gives you 72 hours to support comps for where you guys feel the price is, right? On an FHA or conventional appraisal, that just comes in low and you got to deal with it, right? So on a VA appraisal, you get a chance to affect that appraisal outcome, right? And the number one thing that I see agents never talk about on these Tidewaters is the market conditions, right? That's the one part of an appraisal that is up to the appraiser's discretion on market conditions, right? And one of the easiest ways to win a Tidewater dispute with an appraiser is to submit something he doesn't already or she doesn't already have. And that is, how many offers did you get on your property, right? If you got 10 offers on your property above where this appraiser thinks the value is, well, now you're showing that appraiser where that market condition comes in and they can affect that change, right? But if you just submit them another 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that they already saw, it doesn't affect your outcome, right? So I've had 2 Tidewaters in the last 3 weeks and we've won them both. And that is going to be one of the big things that work with your lenders, because that information has to come from your lender. If your lender doesn't deal with VAs a ton and has questions about Tidewater, call me. I don't care if I have the deal or not. I want to help veterans get into homes. It's been my mission since I got in here. Let me help you and your veterans get there. And again, I don't care if I have the deal. Let's get these VA loans done. And so a little something about VA.
All right, cool. So a couple of upcoming things or ongoing things. So Chris, are you in the room? I saw John. Anyways, Chris has been doing the book club for MREA on Tuesdays.
No, today.
Today, it was Tuesday last week. So today at 1 o'clock, back in the room to hop into MREA. And then the next one's going to say something else. Oh, so next week's team meeting, Melissa Demas is going to come in from MLS to talk about some of the updates with MLS and some of the tips and tricks that are going on. So another reason to show up in the room next week to experience Melissa. And then Friday on our coffee with Scott, we're actually going to dive specifically into kind of on this listing side. Is what are some tactics that we can put into play right now to grab some more listings in a tight market? So that's online Friday at 9 a.m. Thanks. See you guys. All right, cool. So that's all that stuff. I want to kind of get through announcements quickly today because I want to hop into the content right off the bat. And typically when we have a guest speaker in, I've got a printed out bio that tells me all about her. and what she's done and what her story is. Of course, I didn't do any of that today. Do you want to do it?
No.
Okay, shoot. So I've known Ashley for a long time on a personal level because our boys grew up together from infancy up through church and through school. So I don't have a bio to give with you, but Ashley is the CEO and president, founder of 3Strands Global. So you guys have probably seen around town in years past, pre-COVID, where you see these break free runs in Folsom, raising awareness around human trafficking. So it's an organization that started out of El Dorado Hills because of a specific incident that happened at one of our grocery stores. And she got a passion behind that, and for the last 12 years, wow, has been on this mission to end human trafficking and specifically bring education here locally because this stuff happens right in our backyard. And in thinking about our theme going into Red Day this year was like, you guys are real estate agents and you're lenders and you're out in the field every day and you're coming across strangers and people. And how can we help raise all of our awareness to what could be happening right here to maybe create some prevention and stop some of this from happening? And so I thought it was a perfect segue because Hannah had done some internship with them a few years back and suggested that Ashley come in and kind of share her passion and her vision. So I want to thank Hannah for the introduction the reintroduction to get this done. And now I'm going to stop talking and just let you talk. So everybody welcome Ashley Bryant.
Thanks for having me. That's so funny. Yeah, when you know someone really well, sometimes like, shoot, how do I do their bio? But I'll give you just a little bit of background. Scott talked about the human trafficking incident that happened in El Dorado Hills in 2008. When that trial was done and the trafficker was arrested and convicted for 12.5 years in federal prison, 3Strands Global Foundation, the nonprofit, began, and our whole focus was prevention. But today, I'm actually going to spend some time, James, if you'll go to the first slide.
James, you're going to put up her deck, that'd be awesome.
That'd be great. I'm going to actually do some education first, and then I'm going to talk about what 3Strands Global Foundation does. At the end, any questions you have, I'm happy to answer. Just a little bit of background about me in the last 12 years in a nutshell. We have been scaling our programs, our prevention education, as well as our reintegration nationally. There were 6 federal grants given to prevention education to nonprofits in the United States in 6 different states this last year, and our program Protect is actually in 4 of those 6 that were chosen, which is Michigan, California, Texas, and Utah. So we're really proud of what originally began here, and I'll go into a little bit of that, but
we're working on it. We're all working on it.
Oh, okay. So maybe I'll just talk about 3Strands then instead of the education piece. So we today I actually have a little piece of paper Hannah asked for us to bring this. We really focus in on 3, I don't know, did everybody get one of these? Yeah, okay. We focus in on 3 E's. The first is education, the second is employment, and the third is engagement. The education component, it's a program called Protect. And Protect is about protecting our youth, making sure that they are not trafficked either by forced labor or by commercial sexual exploitation, which you all probably are familiar with the term sex trafficking. So those are the 2 components, education and Protect. When we talk about education, it's not just K-12 schools, although that has been our focus for 12 years. It's really about how do we educate the entire community. And that community can be real estate agents, it can be telecommunications agents or industry, it can be law enforcement or social services, it can be lots of different people. But we want to make sure that people are educated so that when we're out in the world, we see this crime that we say hides in plain sight, right? So there you go. So this is a little bit of education. There are at least 100,000 young girls and boys that are exploited in the US. What does that mean? Well, if you think of Santa Clara and the 49er Stadium that was just finished being built, that seats 100,000. So it's about that number. Although we know in the US that it's actually larger than that. University of Texas completed a study in 2016 that said that 345,000 are actually victims of human trafficking in Texas alone. So that number of 100,000, the movement in the United States uses consistently because the International Labor Organization has given that to us. But we know that in pockets, there's been research done that really points to larger numbers. When we talk about trafficking, we talk about forced labor and commercial sexual exploitation. 81% of victims are forced into labor. We don't really talk about that in the US as much as we should. We talk more about sex trafficking. That is 81%. 75% of victims are female and 25% of the victims are children. Okay, James. I can go ahead and pass that one. That's okay. So let's define the issue and tell you what we're trying to eradicate. All right, next one. One of the things that we talk about often is the definition of human trafficking. People will come and say, oh yeah, I know about human trafficking and sex trafficking. And I always smile because human trafficking is an umbrella term. Think of it as an umbrella. And on that umbrella, there are two arms and to the umbrella. One is forced labor, the other is sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation. So in the US, we track data within those two components. There's forced marriage and labor organ trafficking. But those two are the ones that we actually track in Washington, D.C. every single year. The other component of human trafficking that's really important is that sometimes people use the term modern day slavery. In the United States, as a movement, we are no longer using the term modern day slavery. It is human trafficking. We want people to understand that it's forced labor and it's sex trafficking. Those are the two components of human trafficking that we track in the United States. You'll see three words on that third line: force, fraud, and coercion. Those are the most important pieces of this definition. And the reason is because in order to prosecute a crime, we have to actually convince the jury that force, fraud, and coercion, and only one of them, not all three, has happened. And that's sometimes difficult for our prosecutors, and they will tell you that not only helps us define it, but it makes it difficult, because how do you prove fraud, right? We've got to actually put a lot of things in place to prove fraud. Coercion is even harder to prove, and force is easier at all the three. But what's interesting about this, next slide, James, is that if you look and dive down deep, we know force, right? We know fraud, and coercion is that sort of slippery term in the sense of it's that slide, forcing someone to do something without being compensated from a pay perspective for labor, or forcing someone to do something from a sexual perspective. And coercing them means I'm grooming them, right? So I'm spending time with them. I'm spending time to get to know them, to get them to trust me, and then I will coerce them to do things for me, and that's that coercion piece. So coercion is one thing that we, with our students and with the world, when we talk about education, is an important component of looking at human trafficking. So next slide, James. Nearly a third of all sex trafficking cases in 2019, defendants controlled their victims without using violence. So of those three words, coercion and fraud actually happened quite a bit. And we don't think about that, right? We see the images out in the world in the media or the movies about, where there's rope or there's chains or there's handcuffs and there's someone who's bound. That doesn't happen in the US as a majority of the time. It is about a 14-year-old boy who's online, who's just been bullied in his classroom. And he goes online to find friends, finds a friend, has that friend for a couple months. That person tells them, oh, it's just you and I, this is a great friendship, and let's keep this a secret. And that young 14-year-old boy doesn't say anything to his parents or his friends, and that relationship grows over the months. And then that person on the other line asks for a photo. And that photo is of that young person, maybe just a shoulder shot or a foot shot, which seems like kind of weird to us. But then after a while, it gets more and more and more. And all of a sudden, that little 14-year-old boy is now involved, and he's a victim of human trafficking because the images that he sent his friend have now been proliferated on the internet, and pornography falls under human trafficking. So it happens in a way that happens over time. It's not a take and grab crime. There's no white van that pulls over and grabs someone like Take in the movie. That is not what human trafficking looks like in the United States. Next slide. It is these two things that I just talked about. Let's talk about what is, when we say the word prostitution, it's really important to use the term that someone has been prostituted in sex trafficking. The word prostitute is something that someone, for whatever reason, if there was a sociology study out there, I would love to read it. But by using the word prostitute, us in the United States, we think someone's made a choice. I can tell you of the thousands upon thousands of survivors that I have worked with in 12 years, no one has made a choice. Nobody woke up and said, I think I'm just going to sell myself today. That was not a choice. So it's really important for us to be able to realize that within this crime of human trafficking, this is someone who has been prostituted and this has happened to them. When we talk about labor trafficking, we talk about debt bondage, we talk about forced labor and child labor. I was just on the phone yesterday with an ABC alcohol beverage control officer, and he was talking about a case here in Roseville, actually a labor trafficking case at a convenience store, where someone was being forced to work, mattress in the back room, bathing in a mop sink, right? Forced and not paid for their labor. So when you think about forced labor, with the things that you do and you go into homes and you're talking to people, there are indicators, and I'll be talking about that as we go, that you could actually recognize and you could let law enforcement know or the National Trafficking Hotline know what you've seen anonymously.
What's debt bondage?
Yep, debt bondage is, let's say that I'm a foreign national and I've come here from India to work as a general manager in a restaurant. And when I get here, my passport is confiscated and I'm told that I have to pay off my debt of $10,000 because I've been brought here to work, but because I brought you here, actually you have to pay me $10,000. So that's debt bondage.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is called a heat map. This actually is a map of the United States and incidents of human trafficking in the US. Now, just because some of the areas in Montana and North and South Dakota don't have red, blue, or green doesn't mean human trafficking isn't happening. So we often talk about that this is the crime that hides in plain sight. But where you see all of California red and the entire East Coast, that means that the majority of those calls into the National Trafficking Hotline have come from those hot or heat areas. 40 million is the estimate for estimated victims of trafficking worldwide. And then the 100,000 I shared with you, 606 active federal human trafficking cases. You might say, oh my gosh, actually that seems like nothing. It kind of is, right? Because we know that there are lots of victims. But again, if you think back to what I talked about of force, fraud, and coercion, that's hard to prove a lot of times. You know, victims having to sit on the stand and testify against their trafficker who's sitting right there is not an easy thing to do. And so victims often don't testify against their traffickers for fear of their own lives or the lives of their family members. I had the opportunity to go for 2 years every other month to San Quentin Prison and interview 65 inmates who were involved in trafficking themselves or they were victims themselves. It was an eye-opening experience, but it really helped me understand why it's so hard to prosecute this crime. Next slide. So we look at the profile. It's really important for us to recognize that anyone could be a victim of human trafficking. Someone yesterday I was a keynote for a human trafficking summit in Kansas, and one of the individuals said, gosh, Ashley, you know, when I think of victims, I think of a 16 or 18-year-old girl, but the reality is what you shared today is that you're actually serving people who are 40 and 50 and 60 years old who are victims of trafficking. And I said, yeah, that's accurate. That's true. So when we think about a victim, we need to really open our minds to the fact that this can be any gender, it can be any age group, and it can be anyone who is vulnerable, because that's what traffickers are going to prey upon. Okay, next slide, James. One of the things, the ambassador, John Cotton Richmond for the United States, is a phenomenal individual, just a really neat man. And he and I were talking, actually, we're going to have a podcast in a couple weeks. And he said, Ashley, you and I have a difference of opinion when it comes to root causes, and we do. And I put this slide up here because I think it's important to have the conversation. I believe that there are root causes that actually lead to human trafficking, like poverty and homelessness, domestic violence. All those things can be precursors to human trafficking actually happening. And Ambassador Richmond believes that too, but he also thinks that there's a willful choice of the trafficker for power and greed, which I don't disagree with. We just agree to disagree that I think they're equal, and he thinks the will is actually a little bit more than the root causes. But I'd like to be able to put this slide up here to talk about both, that they are a precursor to trafficking actually happening. Okay, next slide. The other piece that's really important, and what I learned over those 2 years with inmates at San Quentin, is that vulnerability is the key thing that traffickers exploit. It is the piece that they look. We had a trafficker that shared with me there. He said, I used to sit at the bottom of an airport where the escalator came down, and I would watch people get off their airplanes, and I would watch for the person who had nobody there to greet them, and they looked a little agitated. They may have looked like they didn't have matching clothes. To him, these were all indicators that that person maybe financially wasn't super stable. And then if they would sit down, he would absolutely make more conversation with that person, usually after a while asking if they wanted to smoke a joint. That's usually how his praying actually happened. But it was at an airport, right? So he was trying to figure out who was most vulnerable in that place. And that's what the trafficker's business is. And it is really a business for traffickers. That's how they see, is that this is a business for them, no different than any other business that's out there, although we know different. What makes somebody vulnerable? It could be love and acceptance, safety, money, food and water and shelter, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We talk about a lot that just those basic needs that need to be met. If they're not met, a trafficker will say to a victim, I'll meet those for you. We had a survivor of trafficking that we were employing, and she said, you know, my trafficker said that he'd be my daycare, he'd be my social worker, he'd be all these things for me, and he was, but he also was my abuser, he was my trafficker, right? So they are like a chameleon. They'll be who they need to be for that victim. Okay, next. This is what I just talked about, but one of the things that also we need to understand in the United States, familial trafficking is actually a very prevalent crime. So family members actually trafficking their kids or their young adults, and it actually is over 51% in the United States is what we see. So when we think about that, a trafficker who is a family member is not only supportive in nature because they're the trafficker, but they could also be a family member as well. So let's talk a little bit about this last year in COVID. And we already knew the role of technology when it comes to human trafficking was that is an avenue or a gateway to the exploitation of folks when it comes to trafficking. But the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children last year said that there has been a 97% increase in online exploitation of our children. So the role of technology now more than ever, and we need to understand what our kids are doing online. We need to understand and be connected with them and asking them about who they're talking to, and not in a punitive way, but having open conversations with our kids so that we understand who it is that they're online with and who their friends are online. Sextortion happens a lot. I shared in the beginning this 14-year-old boy, which is a true case. And so we want to make sure when we are talking to people and our kids or our friends, children, that we understand if there is a relationship where pictures are shared, that's called sextortion, right? So that is a way to extort a youth to be able to do what they want them to do and to blackmail them into continuing to do that. So there's quite a bit of sextortion that is actually on the rise right now because of the online component of school and everything else that we've been doing during COVID. So we need to make sure that our kids understand that sharing photos is something that that we don't want to do online, right? We don't want to share photos online, especially photos of promiscuous, you know, whether it's a bathing suit or anything else. We want to make sure not to do those types of things. Okay, next one. So I talked about grooming, and this is actually a really good example of a youth who desires freedom, right? This is actually a 16-year-old who desires to have freedom and wants to be treated like an adult and wants independence as a child. The outward expression is my parents don't trust me, I'm being treated like a kid, and this is in social media, right? I want to be able to do my own thing. And the perpetrator's response is, I'll encourage you to take risks. You are an adult. You are amazing. You're awesome. That's part of that grooming process, right? So when we talk about grooming in the US, we talk about that slow bit. Traffickers are so patient. That's the thing that you need to remember, is that they're really patient about pinpointing the person that they want to exploit. Okay, next one actually. So the other piece, I happen to interview 65 inmates at San Quentin Prison, but they can be all ethnicities and all genders, right? A trafficker doesn't have to be male. We've had a case actually about 3 years ago in Sacramento. It was a very high profile case. It was 2 women who were the traffickers. So we need to remember that it could be any gender and it could be any ethnicity. Okay. These are just some news headlines. I think that in the media, they talk about it a little bit more, and things that happen around any type of celebrity will always raise the level of awareness for a while. But we also want to make sure that we're speaking facts, not fiction, when we talk about human trafficking. It's really important, and that we don't sensationalize it, and that we really just speak facts about what it is and what it isn't. Okay, next one. So these are actually fact versus fiction. So victims can include people who are born and raised in the US. Most of those that we talk about with that heat map, the majority of those are from the United States. They are born and raised here. Those are our kids who are in this country. There are foreign nationals who are brought here to be trafficked, but the majority of human trafficking cases in the United States are American-born individuals. Next slide. The fact that the hotline, that there were 11,500 cases in 2019, it happens everywhere and doesn't happen just outside the United States. Next one. Human trafficking cases go unreported, and it does happen everywhere. Just because we don't see Montana and North Dakota with lots of red or yellow doesn't mean it's not happening. Next slide. The fact is that it's common for a victim to know his or her trafficker, and the fiction is that they're typically a stranger. This has nothing to do with stranger danger. Human trafficking is not that. It is, less than probably 1% of cases is someone that they didn't know, right? So you might say, well, they didn't know this person online. Oh, they were groomed over time, right? They got to know that person. So it's someone that you know, the fact is. Anyone can be a victim of human trafficking. We talked about that. We serve victims from 16 years old all the way to 60 years old. Okay, next slide. So where's it happening? Next to major freeways, highways, where there's high cost of living, tourism, hotels, busy airports. We just launched an initiative called the TATE Initiative across the United States. It's the Telecommunications Against Trafficking and Exploitation Initiative. And that we are training all telecommunications employees at companies, wireless, as well as telecom and tower climbers across the US to make sure they know what to look for as they're in hotels, as they are in restaurants, as they are in airports, so that we can make sure we know what it looks like. These are some other places that it's happening: restaurants, construction, massage parlors. Next. So this, you asked a question about debt bondage. What are some of the signs of someone being exploited? An over-controlling employer, tense, fearful behavior. You guys can read the list on your own, but these are really important things for us to understand. And what does that look like? And on the sheet of paper today, this sheet actually on the front and back has these lists too, so that you can refer back to them, as well as the National Trafficking Hotline too. Okay, next slide. Go on to the next slide. So this is really important. How do we make sure that we know what to do? So the Human Trafficking Hotline is housed in Washington, D.C., and they triage their calls. So if you see something, if you happen to have a listing, and next to your listing, you're noticing that at all hours of the night, someone's told you 2 a.m., someone's in there, lots of cars in and out. They all happen to be, in this case, all male, I'm telling a real case, that are coming and going. Then you could actually call the hotline and you could say, hey, I've got this property that I'm listed a couple doors down, but I've heard this sort of, gossip. I'm not sure if it really is, but here's the street. As many details as you can give them as possible is the most important thing. The hotline will take everything that you're telling them and they'll let law enforcement know, and it's all anonymous. There's a hotline phone, 800 number, as well as a text number. There's also a chat line too that you can use, but you're anonymously giving your tip, and they will take it and get it to where it needs to be. If it is someone in danger imminently, you call 911, right? There was a case in Texas where actually a woman was at a stop sign, happened to notice some violence that was happening in a home where she was driving by. And for whatever reason, I'm not sure why she chose the National Trafficking Hotline, but she did. And it actually was a trafficking case, but she called 911 and then called the trafficking hotline. So, if there's something imminent, you call them first so that they can get there and they can do what they need to do. But you have all that information on that piece of paper. Okay, so I want to make sure I know what my time is. Am I good on time?
You're good.
Okay.
You got as much as you want.
Okay, so let's talk about the solution. Prevention changes everything. Next slide. I'm gonna in a second, I'm hoping this will work, James, but I'll tee it up first. So one of the things I talked about that's really important is context of human trafficking, the definition, and not sensationalizing it. There are lots of documentaries that are out there over the last, gosh, probably 15 years that sensationalize this crime. When we put this video together, it's about almost 4 minutes. One of the things that's hard to do is to be able to give the viewer, the impression of what's trafficking, in this case, sex trafficking, without some sort of gut or stomach where you're like, oh, that makes me feel uncomfortable. Nothing visually will happen, but if you happen to get triggered by the idea of trafficking, just close your eyes. But this is a 4-minute video that explains not only how trafficking sometimes happens, which in this case, Jess, who is a high schooler, was befriended online for almost 6 months before she actually connected physically with her trafficker and met him. But she was already 6 months in a relationship with this man. So let's see if this plays. case, Jess had been in the one scenario online with someone for months and befriended that person, met them in person, and then was trafficked. In the other scenario, Jess was in a classroom where the Protect program existed and made all of her social media private, and that person never connected with her. So the idea is there's two pathways, and 3Strands Global Foundation, James, you can go to the next slide, is all about prevention, and we believe prevention changes everything, and we have for the last 12 years. Our vision is a world free from human trafficking, and we focus in on prevention education and reintegration programs. Next slide, James. So that's education, employment, and engagement, which I talked about in the very beginning. Go ahead to the next slide, James. So our Protect program is all about making sure that students are safe, K-12. It is a training as well as a curriculum. It was founded by 3Strands Global Foundation, Love Never Fails, and Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, the California Department of Education, and the Attorney General's office here in California. It is the program that we are scaling, you say that's good. It is scaling across the United States. We're in 6 states, and it is a program that originated actually here in Sacramento, in the greater Sacramento area, which is pretty humbling for us. 3Strands is, we have 7 offices, 24 staff in those 7 offices across the US, and we are about a $2.5 million nonprofit a year as we do our work. So the Protect program is all about 4 prongs. It's about the protocol setting, it's about training, it's about curriculum, and then it's about data. Our staff know that I'm a data junkie, like Scott was writing all the stuff on the board today. I'm like, yes, data, because I love data and I want to see that we're making an impact. And I want to make sure that those funds that anyone, and you guys included, have ever graced us with, that we are making sure that those are impacting those we serve. So this is the Protect program. Go ahead, next slide. We also believe strongly in evaluating, and that means we have a theory of change with every program that we do. And so that means for Protect, it is behavioral change as well as raising the level of knowledge and awareness, as well as reducing incident rates in our youth. Next slide. The beautiful thing about Protect is that we have a partnership with Arizona State University. They've spent 25 years teaching how people learn. And so we have used their platform to scale Protect in all the places that we do our work. So you can see this is just a snapshot of our training as well as the curriculum that teachers teach in the classroom. Years ago, we used to do that when we first started, but now teachers, counselors, and nurses, SROs, sheriff resource officers do that across the US. Okay. This is just a quote. You can actually go onto 3Strands website and read a lot of the stories of not only the teachers that have been through the training, but also our survivors too, with our survivor program. But this happens to be an educator who went through the program. So we've reached over 500,000 kids and 60,000 adults. These 2 percentages of students surveyed after Protect can define human trafficking, really important as we make sure that they know what it is. And then the next one, which I love, is that 93% can protect themselves as well as their peers, which is important. These just show you, again, because I'm a data person, and Kylie knows that when she gave this to Hannah, but this is just, this speaks to what I talked about in the first one. Remember I talked about familial trafficking being in the US a key component, and this is that we've actually really made sure that they understand that post-test, which is the goal, and then the definition that they understand, and that they, as mandated reporters, 97% say they know how to report human trafficking, which is really important too. Next slide. And then this actually is during COVID, which is why we grabbed it. It's really difficult to be able to teach online and make sure that they can that the students are safe, but our teachers have been doing that, which is incredible. And so this is from an educator who really understood that building trusting relationships, even with her students online, was important. Go ahead. So that's our education. Our next is employment, and this is our Employ Plus Empower. 3Strands in 2016 started to employ survivors into sustainable jobs. We were actually downtown with the governor, or the governor, not the governor, with the mayor at the time, and they were talking about how can we make sure that those at risk and survivors have sustainable jobs. So we have placed over 300 since 2016 into sustainable jobs in Greater Sacramento, Yolo, El Dorado, Placer, Sac County, and Amador. Next slide. This is not only have we placed over 300, but we work with 58 different nonprofits. For those of you who've ever worked with nonprofits before, I was in the for-profit world for years and years in marketing communications, and the nonprofit world is not collaborative in nature. And so the fact that someone works with 58 different agencies in one program is kind of telling for our core values and who we are as an agency. So it's about partnership development, because not one agency can solve this problem on its own. And then ultimately it's about case management or wraparound services for survivors so that they can thrive in their jobs. Next slide. We also have a theory of change with all our programs. It makes sure that we're on target and that we have the impact that we know we want to have with those we serve. So basic needs, really making sure that the basic needs are met. I mean, last week, one of our social workers went and sat with someone for 3 hours at the DMV because they've never had a driver's license and they're in their 20s, never. Right, so something like that is part of the services that we provide for our survivors. If it means they've never had a social security card, or they're not sure what their given name actually is because they've been given a different name by their trafficker, it means sitting with that person, making sure that they have all those basic needs met. And ultimately financial security. This is my favorite slide. I was talking about how, because I'm such a data person, but this is the flow of what we do all the way to reduce risk. That diamond in the middle is what we really want to have happen for our survivors, that they have increased self-esteem, improved mental health, and better social supports as they go out into the world. Next slide. We also leverage the online platform with our survivors. During COVID, this was a key component of our pivot. To make sure that our survivors were able to do the things they needed to prepare to interview for jobs, even though that we weren't in person with them. Next slide. And we've served over 372 we placed last year alone in 2020. And then we work with 58 different agencies in Sacramento. We've expanded this program to San Francisco. BlackRock and the Julia Burke Foundation came in with $150,000 for 3Strands to open the San Francisco office, which we're incredibly humbled by. And so we have opened, and we have our program director there, and that will serve our first 15 survivors in the actually by next month, which is really exciting. Next slide. This is what actually survivors earned this last year. Then we have two pathways. We have an employment pathway and education. This is what they earned in their job pathway. And then those who are in education, obviously there weren't any wages to earn. And then it helps you to see the ages we serve. Remember I told you 16 all the way to 60. And last year, these were some of the ages as well as the ethnicities. Yep, next slide. This is a really important thing. When we went through the educational component of what I went over human trafficking is and what it isn't, one of the things we talked about was vulnerability. Well, if you are involved in child welfare, then you are more vulnerable than someone who may not be involved in child welfare. If you're foster youth, that also makes you more vulnerable. So this really shows those we serve, and 62% have been involved in the child welfare system who are survivors. And then the risk factors, those are all risk factors too that we have seen in the population we serve. Okay, next slide. This is Kayla. I love this story. Kayla actually is thriving. She's not only been promoted to supervisor, but she's doing really well. But when she came to us, she had been arrested for prostitution and was having a hard time finding a job. And so 3Strands and our social workers sat with her and figured out what her goals were and put a master application together for her. And she is working for the Department of Rehabilitation, and it's just thriving. Last but not least is our engagement. Scott talked about the Break Free Run, which we've had for 11 years. It's usually in the fall and will be in the fall again this year. And then we also have our UN status, and we also consult for the UN and for prevention, as well as back in Washington, D.C. We actually, it's really a funny story, but it's kind of, I actually at 11 p.m. one night decided to write legislation. I've never done that in my life, but I decided that in order for us to get education in the schools, we needed to change the law and mandate it for teachers. So I wrote a piece of legislation called AB 1227. It was signed by the governor that year, and it is now law in the state of California. It was actually very first law in all 50 states that mandates training of teachers and education of students. So California was the first to actually have that. Then we went on to actually write SB 198 in Utah as well. So we do quite a bit of work around legislation. All right, next slide. And these are just some of the people who have run our races and volunteered with us. And the last slide, I think it is. So I started, and Scott shared the case in 2008. That actually was my good friend. His daughter was 17 when she was trafficked and sold online 15 to 20 times a day to men who were seeking to have sex with minors before she was recovered by the FBI and the El Dorado County Sheriff. And Scott continues to volunteer for us. He has for 12 years. And he turns what was ugly and horrific into good. And so this has really been our prevention focus and making sure that we stop this crime before it starts from the very beginning. Next slide. That's all of us a couple years back just in California at the race. And then the last slide. Actually, there's ways to connect with us. Instagram, please, if I didn't say, Kylie would just have my head. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram. And then the last one, I think. Yeah. So one of the things I'd love and challenge you to think about is becoming one. And we have a program, it's a monthly donor program that you can consider giving to 3Strands and sustaining our impact about what I've talked about today. You can subscribe to our newsletter and you can share our work with anyone that you talk to. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time today and your consideration of all the things I've talked about. Human trafficking is not a pretty thing to talk about. It's a heinous crime. But I hope that I gave you a bit of hope in the midst of all the work that we do and that you know that we will continue to press on and do the work that we do as we're out in the world. So thank you very much.
A couple of questions just to kind of think about, and somebody else out here may have some questions too, but
Yeah.
I was thinking about just as a parent, especially like in this year of pushing everybody online. I mean, our kids are online a lot anyways, but with all the homeschooling and being online for classes and whatnot, as a parent, what are some signs that you could be looking for in your own household that something might be amiss?
Yeah. So if you see your child isolate, if you see your child pull away from friends or family members, that's one really good indicator. If your child wants to be online and doors closed and wants privacy, your home is a place where you probably keep people safe. So privacy is one of those things you have to have a conversation with your child about what is privacy and what isn't privacy. And when they have their computers on, privacy doesn't mean a door is closed, right? But you have to have an open conversation with your child because otherwise they feel like it's punitive conversation. So we talk about open conversations are always best. You know, I just wanted to take a walk today. I mean, walking around the block, sitting on the steps of the inside or outside of the house, just to say, hey, I just want to know what your day was like, you know, or share something that happened to you when you were young that shows a little vulnerability that makes it so your child understands that you want to have a conversation that's open and there's no punitive piece to it. Because a lot of times our kids think that, oh my gosh, if I tell something, I'm going to be punished for it. The teen examples I've given you today, none of those kids told their parents, not one. They were doing what they were doing and did not have one conversation with an adult who would have kept them safe. And part of that is because they don't know how. But if we have those open conversations with them from time to time, it allows them to free up to be able to have the conversation. So super important.
And we end up in strangers' houses a lot, showing homes, you know, and like you gave a couple examples in there, but if we're out showing a property, anything that we could be looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, I think one of the things that I talk about a lot is trust your gut. I mean, we talk about 99% of the time when people are interviewed who have been victims of a crime, they say that their gut said something, but they didn't do what their gut told them. So if you get into a property and your gut says ew or creepy or weird or something, trust your gut because it usually is accurate or right. And so what you do with that then, you can let Scott know or law enforcement or something. I don't know what it was. I may be absolutely nothing, but my gut told me that this guy was just a creep or this woman was really off. Or, you know, I noticed on this woman's shoulder, she had a guy's name tattooed on it. And that could be nothing, but you know, I just have some concerns. That sheet of paper that I gave you today has a lot of the signs of a victim that might have, you know, they won't look at you in the eye when they're having a conversation. If there's an overly controlling boyfriend or partner, they answer for them. You know, multiple, you know, there was a nail salon local where lots of girls were huddled and a guy was on the corner and someone happened to pass by and said, I don't know, something was weird about it. And it was a trafficking situation, right? The guy had taken her to a nail salon to get her nails done, all girls. And they, and he was watching them as that was happening. So you keep your wits about you and just kind of around you. And then if something doesn't feel right, then do a gut check, look at the piece of paper with all the things listed. I'm trying to think of, you know, you probably have been privy to some of the cases here in Sacramento where homes have been used as brothels, right? So I would say for you guys, if there's something that you sense in that space, that you let law enforcement know as soon as you have that sense.
And I actually wrote down trust your gut because I made that call a couple times. Actually, let me rephrase that. I've called Jen to say I had something go on and Jen said, call Ashley or call the number. Like trust your gut, like these things happen out there. You'd be better off to make a call and be nothing than to do nothing and find out later on that something had happened.
And the one that was in, I'm thinking of Toronto in particular, that one, it was a neighbor who called because at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., there were lots of cars that were coming and going and it just didn't seem right and they weren't sure. And so that was how that actually was, that was the sting that was put together for that. Yeah.
When you said you passed that legislation, the AB 12 for the schools, what grades, so what grades are they targeting?
Yeah, so our curriculum is elementary all the way through high school, but the legislation actually speaks to once in middle school and once in high school. So all staff has to be trained, but the kids have to be taught at least once in middle school and once in high school. Our elementary curriculum does not use the term human trafficking. It's actually about safe people and safe places. It's about open conversations, what are opinions versus preferences, human rights. We want our youth when they're young. In fact, we were just on the phone with 12 survivors who are reviewing our curriculum that was that's being scaled through the federal program. And survivors said to us on this call, look, I had no one who was safe in my life. So can you guys in this curriculum define safe? I mean, think about that, that our kids, if you were to ask them to go home, you know, could you help me, what did you have, how do you see the word safe? Like just ask them that. What does that mean to you, safe, being safe? And it'll be interesting to hear what they have to say. And, you know, this survivor said, I would not have known what that was. There was no one in my life that was safe to me. So you need to define that for me. So I go, oh, I guess it could be a teacher, you know, to be able to reframe it. So the legislation in Utah is actually parents, teachers, and youth in middle and high school. So they added parents in their legislation.
The other thing, your slide about the 62% in the foster, are you guys doing something to kind of target the foster system so that,
yeah,
because that's a lot.
Yeah, I love that question. So there are 500,000 kids in the foster system in the United States. We are hoping and praying that we get a contract. We just pitched a big $1.5 million contract to a health provider to provide training for foster families and for the 110,000 youth that they serve, because that needs to happen in a big way. So we are in those conversations because they are our most vulnerable. We've always in schools with teachers, that's a huge part of our curriculum guide is, you know, if you have someone who's more at risk, who's in the child welfare system, these are things that you might want to watch for, triggering words or language, right? Things that might make it so that they would be more affected, as well as the prevention steps for that youth in that classroom. Because the good news is that hopefully they're in the classroom, but we also are trying to make sure that we do it separately too. And through training and education. So. Yeah, someone else had a question. I missed it. Yeah.
I'm curious to continue on that. Are you actually trying to work with the foster system to change what they are doing, how they operate? Because isn't it more true that most of the trafficking through the foster system is through the families? It's not outside forces, it's the actual people the foster system is supposed to support and help the children.
Yeah, so our foster system in the US, this is Ashley speaking, not 3Strands Global Foundation, is broken. And so our foster system we need an overhaul all the way. I actually have been to Washington, actually in Zoom calls lately, specifically to have conversations, deep, hard conversations around what are we doing. There is no, I don't know if you all know, but there is not a congressional committee on child welfare in the United States of America. There does not exist a child welfare committee. It means there's no Congress and Senate who actually collaboratively oversee child welfare. It's actually 3 subcommittees down. There is one on printing, and there is one on the environment, and there is one on aging, but not child welfare. So we, 3Strands, has been working for the last 7 months at how do we make that happen. There is a 150-member caucus that does look after child welfare, which Karen Bass actually heads up. But there is not a congressional committee. So we've been trying to figure out how that happens. It's got to happen at the top.
So a couple of action steps on the way out. So here's a couple of ways, because I know someone's question, how do I get involved? So there's ways to get involved right there on the screen by donations and by subscribing to the newsletter, by participating in the run in the fall.
Yeah. It's gonna
Maybe
be,
we'll do that as an office.
yeah, you should, absolutely.
Just be like a live run, like with people
Yes,
together running.
Yeah.
And then I just wrote the hotline number up here one more time too.
Yeah.
Just program that on your phone,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That, just save that on your phone as the prevention hotline. And if you ever feel the need that you need to dial it, that you're not looking it up, just search it on your contacts
Yeah.
and it's there for you. So, well, again, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you coming in. You're the best. So thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, just wrapping up. If this circuit court, if this is a passion that if you want to learn more information or get more involved, always looking for donations, always looking for volunteers, always looking for awareness. So if that touches your heartstrings, that's an opportunity. And then don't forget about the blood drive tomorrow too. Just if we have a couple spots left, it's a really huge need in our backyard right now, just to step in. I don't know how long it takes, 30 minutes or something. Just sign up for a spot tomorrow and make a difference right here in our community. And there's lunch out there somewhere. I think it's on its way. So if you guys want to grab a piece of pizza and hang out for a few minutes, I'm sure Ashley can hang around for a couple minutes if you guys have any specific questions for her. And if not, we'll see you all next week. So thank you guys.